Karen intentionally poured paint on neighbor's car out of jealousy. The house across the street caught the whole thing on camera. Part 1. My name is Emily Vargas, and until a few weeks ago, I thought I lived in the kind of neighborhood where things like this just didn't happen. Our cul-de-sac was supposed to be peaceful. Rows of well-kept lawns, mailboxes lined up like soldiers, and tidy two-story homes where everyone smiled just enough to seem polite, but not enough to invite real conversation. It was the kind of suburban dream that looked good from the outside, perfect for someone like Karen Whitmore. Karen had lived across the street from me for 8 years longer than anyone else on our block. Early 60s, crisp silver hair always tucked neatly into a tight bun, and an attitude sharper than the hedge clippers she used religiously every Saturday morning. She was the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood's standards. God forbid if your grass grew an inch too long, or if you left your garbage bins out past noon on pickup day. You'd find a passive-aggressive note stuck to your front door by evening. People tolerated her because she hid her cruelty behind concern. To her, it wasn't judgment. It was helpful advice. It wasn't gossip. It was keeping the community informed. It wasn't jealousy. It was protecting property values. At least that's what Karen told herself. And for a long time, everyone went along with it, including me. I bought my house on Chestnut Grove Drive 3 years ago. It was a huge deal, the culmination of years working double shifts as a nurse, sacrificing vacations nights out, and frankly, a good chunk of my 20s. When I pulled into the driveway that first time, keys in hand, I felt like I had finally made it. At first, Karen pretended to be welcoming. She brought over a store-bought pie and told me it was just something homemade. She offered advice on which lawn service was acceptable and which colors I should absolutely avoid if I ever decided to repaint the shutters. I smiled, I nodded, I thanked her. I figured that was just how suburban neighbors acted. I didn't realize Karen saw me as a threat. See, I wasn't married. I didn't have 2 kids and a golden retriever, like she thought a respectable homeowner should. Worse, in her eyes, I drove a shiny new Tesla Model Y, a birthday present to myself, after a grueling year of night shifts during COVID. To Karen, that wasn't something a young unmarried woman should own. It didn't fit her image of the neighborhood, and resentment like hers doesn't stay quiet forever. At first, it was subtle little things. My mailbox got knocked over twice in 1 month. I found my trash cans dragged into the street more than once. Once a packet of neighborhood rules just happened to appear taped to my front door, with certain sections highlighted, all ones about proper landscaping, appropriate vehicle presentation, and community standards of conduct. I shrugged it off. I told myself I was imagining it. Until the night the paint incident happened. It was a Saturday late spring, just after 11:30 p.m. I had just gotten home from a friend's birthday dinner. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something strange, streaks of dark, glossy red all over the hood and windshield of my car. My stomach dropped. Paint, thick dripping paint. For a second I just stared at it, not quite able to process it. The fresh smell of chemicals burned my nose. Droplets ran down the Tesla's sleek curves, pulling onto the driveway. It wasn't random either. It was deliberate, targeted, vicious. The next morning, the rumors started. Apparently, Karen had wasted no time telling anyone who would listen that some reckless teenager must have done it. Vandalism was on the rise, she said. Kids these days had no respect for property. She even hinted that maybe it was those guests Emily keeps having over, as if my friends, who she had never even met, were criminals. I was furious, but what could I do? No one saw anything. There were no street cameras, or so I thought. What Karen didn't know, what none of us knew, was that my next-door neighbor, Mr. Franklin, had recently installed a state-of-the-art Ring camera system after his mailbox was smashed by an unknown accident. And Mr. Franklin was retired and bored, and very, very meticulous. The footage he captured that night was nothing short of damning. The video was clear, painfully clear. At 11:18 p.m., the recording showed Karen herself dressed in dark slacks and a windbreaker sneaking across the street with a can of paint hidden inside a plastic grocery bag. She looked around like a cartoon villain, then hurried up my driveway. Without hesitation, she popped the lid off the can, and with a force that spoke volumes about the anger she carried, she hurled the contents across the hood of my Tesla. She even smiled afterward. Not a nervous smile, a satisfied one. Then she hurried back across the street and disappeared into her house, shutting off her porch lights as if that would erase the evidence. When Mr. Franklin showed me the footage, Sunday morning my hands shook so badly I almost dropped his phone. "This neighborhood deserves better," he said, handing me a USB stick with a copy I couldn't speak. I was too stunned, too angry, too heartbroken. Karen, the woman who handed out flyers about neighborhood pride, had done this. And she thought she could lie her way out of it. The news spread faster than wildfire. By Monday afternoon, nearly everyone on our block had seen the footage. Some people were openly furious. Others tried to pretend it wasn't their business. A few loyal to Karen made excuses. Maybe it was a moment of weakness. She's just under a lot of stress. She's been a pillar of the community, but most weren't buying it. Because you can't watch a video like that, someone destroying another person's property out of pure spite, and walk away unchanged, the local Facebook group exploded with comments. "Unbelievable. This is the community leader we trusted. My kid was terrified last night. She thought the vandal might come back. If Karen can do this to Emily, what's she capable of doing to the rest of us? If you excuse this behavior, you're part of the problem." People demanded action. Some called for Karen to be reported to the Homeowners Association Board. Others wanted the police involved. For the first time in her life, Karen wasn't controlling the narrative. She was the villain, and everyone knew it. But the story didn't end there, because Karen, in true Karen fashion, refused to admit she was wrong. Instead, she doubled down. At a hastily organized emergency HOA meeting that Friday, she stood up, her face tight with barely concealed rage, and accused me of faking the footage. "Technology can be manipulated," she cried. "I have been a faithful steward of this community for 8 years. Why would I throw that away on some petty revenge fantasy?" The room was packed. No one spoke. No one defended her. Not even the board president, her longtime ally, could meet her eyes. Because deep down, everyone knew the truth. The footage wasn't fake. The paint wasn't fake. The betrayal wasn't fake. And Karen's perfect facade was crumbling for everyone to see. Part 2. The days after the HOA meeting were unlike anything Chestnut Grove had ever seen. Normally, neighbors would nod politely from behind their garden fences or give a tight smile while jogging past with their golden retrievers. Now it felt like living inside a powder keg, just waiting for the next spark to set it off. Karen had managed to alienate nearly everyone. Instead of apologizing, instead of doing the one thing that might have salvaged an ounce of her dignity, she walked around the neighborhood as if she were the victim. She glared at anyone who dared to make eye contact. She muttered under her breath at backyard barbecues. She even started a rumor that I had doctored the footage to make her look bad. Meanwhile, the evidence was undeniable. The day after the HOA meeting, my neighbor Lisa printed still frames from Mr. Franklin's video and pinned them to the community bulletin board by the mailbox cluster. The photos showed Karen mid-throw, paint flying from her hand, a twisted grin on her face. Underneath, Lisa wrote in bold black letters, "Say no to neighborhood bullying." It was brutal, it was public, and it was deserved. The fallout came quickly. First, Karen's volunteer neighborhood watch captain title was revoked by the HOA board quietly but permanently. Then Mr. Franklin, who had always been neutral before, organized a block meeting without Karen for the first time in 8 years. People who had never spoken openly about their frustrations suddenly came alive. At that meeting, one woman recounted how Karen had once called code enforcement on her because her Halloween decorations stayed up too long. Another man confessed that Karen had reported his teenage son for suspicious loitering when he was literally just waiting for his ride to soccer practice. Story after story poured out. We weren't just dealing with one act of vandalism. We were facing a long, ugly history of quiet intimidation and control. And for the first time, no one was afraid of her anymore. I wish I could say Karen backed down at that point, that the mounting shame, the visible disgust from her neighbors, and the very public exposure of her actions made her reflect, apologize, or even just stay silent. But she didn't. Instead, Karen escalated. Within a week, she filed a police report against ME, accusing me of defamation, harassment, and intentional distress. The irony was enough to make my head spin. The officer who took the report, Officer Daniels, looked almost embarrassed to even be writing it down. When he came to my house to follow up, he stood awkwardly on my porch and said, "Honestly, ma'am, based on what I've seen from the footage, it's not looking good for her." We have the original timestamps and source files. It's pretty airtight. Still, because Karen insisted they had to go through the motions, I found myself spending an entire afternoon at the police station, giving a formal statement, turning over copies of the video, and signing paperwork I didn't even fully understand. It was humiliating. It was exhausting, and it made me angrier than I had ever been. Not because I feared the outcome, but because Karen was wasting everyone's time doubling down on her lies instead of owning what she did. The public found out about the police report the next day. A local news station, one of those small-town channels desperate for juicy content, picked up the story after someone anonymously, definitely Lisa, sent in the footage. The segment was short but devastating. Suburban vandalism, community divided, after shocking caught-on-camera incident. Footage shown Karen throwing paint, Karen storming out of the HOA meeting interview clips from outraged neighbors. It went viral, at least by small-town standards. Hundreds of comments flooded the station's Facebook page. This woman should be ashamed. Imagine destroying someone's property and then calling yourself the victim. She represents everything wrong with nice suburban racism and classism. Team Emily all the way. By the weekend, Karen couldn't leave her house without being filmed. Teenagers biked past her driveway shouting, "Paint thief!" Someone plastered a giant cardboard cutout of a paint can on her front lawn with the words, "Karen was here," in huge dripping letters. And for the first time, Karen couldn't control the narrative. No letter-writing campaign, no whispered gossip sessions, no alliances with the HOA board could save her. She had exposed herself and the town had decided, but the damage wasn't just social, it turned legal. Because the footage was so clear, the police finally opened an actual case this time against Karen. She was charged with criminal mischief and property damage. The sight of two uniformed officers calmly walking up to her house with a warrant in hand as dozens of neighbors peeked through blinds and camera phones clicked from all directions was surreal. Karen didn't go to jail first, offense non-violent, but she was cited, fined heavily, and given community service. And because I filed an insurance claim, her home insurance rates skyrocketed. It was public. It was humiliating. And it was exactly the kind of accountability she had spent years avoiding. Despite all this, the deeper wounds took longer to heal. The vandalism to my car cost over $7,000 in repairs. Insurance covered most of it, but every time I sat behind the wheel afterward, I couldn't help but think of that night, how easily someone's jealousy could stain something I had worked so hard for. More than that, the whole experience made me see the neighborhood differently. The smiles felt more real now, more earned among the people who stood by me. And the silence from the few who still defended Karen was deafening. Chestnut Grove wasn't perfect, it never had been. But it was changing, and maybe, just maybe, we were becoming better for it. Part 3. If Karen thought the worst was behind her after the police citation, she was wrong. The neighborhood wasn't just angry anymore, it was energized. And it wasn't just about my car anymore. People had been waiting a long time for someone to stand up to Karen Whitmore. Now that the door had been kicked open, the floodwaters came rushing in. The first sign that things were spiraling came from the HOA board itself. For years, Karen had unofficially influenced most decisions, rules about fence heights, paint colors, even which flowers were acceptable for front yards. People had grumbled, but no one had directly challenged her. She had a way of making every rule sound like it was for the greater good. But after the paint incident, the HOA president, Mr. Armitage, a mild golf-obsessed retiree, called a special election. The email read, "Due to recent concerns about leadership practices and community relations, we are opening nominations for new HOA board positions immediately." Translation? Get ready. Karen, your reign is over. I didn't plan to run for anything. Honestly, after everything that happened, I wanted peace. But others had different plans, Lisa Mister. Franklin and a few other neighbors formed a campaign not just to remove Karen from any influence, but to rewrite some of the HOA's outdated rules altogether. They wanted more transparency, less micromanagement, and bluntly, fewer power-hungry Karens running the show yard signs popped up overnight. Chestnut Grove for everyone, vote for change. Meanwhile, Karen's front yard stayed conspicuously empty. For once, she had no clever counterattack. No flyers, No passive-aggressive newsletters, just silence. But silence isn't the same as surrender. One morning about 2 weeks after the election announcement, I woke up to find something shocking. Someone, and it didn't take a genius to guess who, had plastered anonymous flyers all over the neighborhood. Each flyer had a photo of me stepping out of my Tesla, heavily zoomed in and captioned, "Is this who we want? Representing us. Unstable, disrespectful, a troublemaker." There was no name signed, no organization listed, just fear-mongering. I stared at the flyer in disbelief. My hands shook with rage. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was personal. Karen had crossed a new line, and this time she would regret it. That afternoon, Mr. Franklin pulled up a new video from his security cameras. Once again, Karen had been caught on tape this time, sneaking around the neighborhood just before dawn, stuffing the slanderous flyers into mailboxes and pinning them to fences. It was so brazen, so foolish, it almost defied belief. This time, we didn't just keep the footage among ourselves. We sent it straight to the HOA and the police. Tampering with mailboxes is a federal crime. By the end of the week, Karen received an official notice of HOA censure and a formal warning from law enforcement. She wasn't arrested again, the small-town leniency, but the message was clear. Keep pushing and the consequences would get worse. But karma wasn't done with Karen yet. Around the same time, a new family moved into the neighborhood, the Johnsons. The Johnsons were everything Karen hated, a young interracial couple with two energetic kids, and a front yard full of colorful lawn gnomes, and a dog that barked a little too loudly at dusk. Naturally, Karen snapped. Within a week, she filed 3 formal complaints against them for noise violations and yard decor that clashed with community standards. The Johnsons fought back. They posted every complaint letter they received on their front window like war trophies. They made TikToks about Karen's harassment. They exposed every interaction online. The videos went viral. One particularly damning clip showed Karen standing on the sidewalk screaming at Mrs. Johnson over the disrespectful state of her garden, while several neighbors filmed in stunned silence. The caption, "When your neighbor thinks she owns the whole block," it racked up 500,000 views in 2 days, and suddenly Chestnut Grove wasn't just a quiet suburban cul-de-sac anymore. It was a battleground, and Karen had painted herself as the villain to the whole internet. The news trucks came next. Reporters camped out by the community entrance, interviewing neighbors, snapping pictures of Karen's now permanently drawn blinds. A journalist from a major network contacted me for a full interview. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to turn my personal pain into a public spectacle. But then I thought about all the people Karen had hurt over the years, all the silent humiliations, the petty power plays, the fear she had instilled just because no one wanted to rock the boat. Maybe it was time someone did. I agreed. When the piece aired, it was brutal. Suburban tyranny, how one woman's quest for perfection destroyed a community. It featured clips of Karen's paint attack interviews with neighbors she had bullied, side-by-side shots of the Johnsons' colorful yard versus Karen's sterile, rule-obsessed lawn. It ended with a haunting quote from Mrs. Johnson. "We didn't move here to be controlled. We moved here to build a life. And no one has the right to take that away just because they don't like who we are." Karen's downfall wasn't a fiery explosion. It was a slow, painful public collapse. By the end of the month, she had resigned from all HOA involvement. She listed her house for sale at a loss. She stopped speaking to almost everyone. And worst of all, she had to walk around every day knowing that everyone had seen the truth. No amount of rules flyers or whispered gossip could save her reputation now. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began to heal. The Johnsons painted a giant mural on their garage door. A tree made of multicolored handprints, neighbors' kids, anyone who wanted to participate. At the center of the tree in bold white letters were the words, "Grow together." For the first time in a long time, Chestnut Grove felt like a community. Not a prison of silent judgment, but a living, breathing place full of messy, imperfect, beautiful people. People like me, people like the Johnsons, people who had been waiting far too long to breathe freely. And as for Karen, the last time I saw her, she was driving away in a battered sedan, her tight bun undone, her face pale and defeated. No grand goodbyes, no final speeches, just silence. And for once, it was a silence we all welcome. Part 4, In the months after Karen left, something strange and beautiful happened to Chestnut Grove. The fear lifted. It wasn't immediate. You don't undo years of silent tension overnight, but slowly, like the first blooms after a brutal winter, the neighborhood began to change. It started with small things. People who used to scurry into their garages without a word began stopping to chat. Front porches that had sat empty for years suddenly had rocking chairs and potted plants. Kids played basketball in driveways without anyone scowling at them from across the street. It was as if the entire block took one long collective breath and finally exhaled. The HOA elections brought in fresh leadership people like Mr. Franklin Lisa and a few new faces who genuinely cared about building community, not controlling it. One of their first acts was to revise the HOA bylaws. No more absurd restrictions on paint colors or garden gnomes. No more weaponizing community standards to bully people into submission. Instead, the new rules focused on basic safety and respect, and nothing more. Chestnut Grove wasn't just surviving the storm Karen had created. We were thriving. As for me, I changed too. Before everything happened, I thought the best way to survive was to stay small, to keep my head down, avoid making waves, and just exist quietly. Karen taught me otherwise. She showed me that silence protects no one, that injustice, even in small forms, demands to be confronted, that standing up even when your voice shakes matters. After the neighborhood election, Lisa encouraged me to join the Welcome Committee, a small group that helped greet new families, organize block parties, and make sure no one felt isolated the way I once had. At first, I hesitated. Wasn't that ironic? Me trying to bring people together after everything. But Lisa just laughed and said, "You're exactly who we need. Someone who knows how much kindness matters." So I said yes, and that yes turned out to be the best decision I ever made. The Johnsons' mural became the heart of the neighborhood. Every season, new handprints were added, kids who grew tall enough to reach higher branches, newcomers from across town, even shy retirees who finally felt safe enough to step forward. It wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about belonging, about knowing that no matter where you came from or what your yard looked like, you had a place here. Chestnut Grove wasn't just a street lined with houses, it was home. One evening in late summer, as the sun dipped low and the air buzzed with the sounds of kids playing and sprinklers hissing, I sat on my porch sipping iced tea and watched as the Johnsons hosted a neighborhood barbecue. Everyone was there. Mr. Franklin manned the grill, flipping burgers with a focus that would have made a surgeon jealous. Lisa chased her two dogs around the lawn, laughing so hard she almost dropped her lemonade. The new families, the ones who had heard the rumors about Chestnut Grove, but decided to give us a chance anyway, mingled easily, swapping stories and plates of food. It was messy. It was noisy. It was wonderful. At one point, Mrs. Johnson came over, a plate of ribs in one hand and a tired but beaming smile on her face. She sat down next to me and said, "You know, none of this would have happened without you." I shook my head. "Without all of us," I corrected. It took a village to fix what she broke. We clinked our plastic cups together and laughed, because it was true. Later that night, after the last hot dog had been eaten and the last firefly had been chased, the Johnson kids begged their parents to let them add new handprints to the mural. Their little palms were covered in neon blue and sunset orange paint as they pressed them against the garage door, leaving bright, messy prints. When they were done, they stepped back proudly. In the center of the tree, someone had added a new phrase curling upward like a branch. "Hate has no home here." No one said it aloud, but we all felt it. This was our declaration, our promise, our future. Sometimes when I think back to everything that happened, the vandalism, the rumors, the fear, it feels like another lifetime. But in a way, I'm grateful. Not for the pain, not for the betrayal, but for the transformation it sparked. Karen tried to break us. Instead, she set us free. I think about her. Sometimes I wonder if somewhere in some other town she's still trying to enforce her version of standards. Or maybe she learned something too. Maybe she realized that control is a poor substitute for connection, that fear cannot create community, that kindness isn't weakness, it's strength. I hope so. Because in the end, we all deserve a second chance, even the people who hurt us the most. As the stars blinked to life above Chestnut Grove that night, I sat quietly and watched the last of the laughter drift through the air like music. For the first time in a long time, I felt something deeper than victory. I felt peace. Real, hard-earned, beautiful peace. And I knew without a doubt that whatever happened next, we could face it. Together, the sound of a new beginning. A year later, Chestnut Grove was almost unrecognizable, but in the best possible way. The lawns still stretched green and tidy under the summer sun, and the mailboxes still lined up like loyal sentries. But there was something new now, something invisible yet undeniable stitched into the very air of the place. Joy, real joy. Not the forced smiles of fear or the brittle nods of obligation, but the easy laughter of neighbors who knew one another, who celebrated each other's victories and grieved each other's losses. The Johnsons hosted a block party every June, and this year was the biggest yet. Children raced barefoot across the street, their shrieks and giggles blending into the warm evening breeze. Music floated from portable speakers, a mix of old classics and new beats. The smell of barbecue and fresh-cut grass mingled sweetly in the air, and at the heart of it all stood the mural bigger and bolder than ever. Dozens more handprints had sprouted since last summer, forming a vibrant, chaotic tree that now spanned the entire garage door. Some prints were tiny, some large, some neat, others smudged and wild. Above it all, the words still gleamed, "Hate has no home here." Every time I looked at it, something in my chest tightened, something raw and beautiful and real. We hadn't just survived what Karen did, we had transformed because of it. That night, as the last of the fireworks fizzled against the stars, Mr. Franklin, holding a plate piled high with Lisa's famous brownies, wandered over to where I sat. He handed me one with a grin and said, "We did good, kid." I smiled. "We are good," I corrected him. He chuckled and nodded toward the mural. "You know," he said, his voice turning soft, "when you first moved in, I figured you'd last 6 months before Karen scared you off." I laughed, the sound surprising even me. "Honestly, I thought so too," I admitted. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the kids play tag in the twilight. Then Mr. Franklin said, "Sometimes the hardest storms, they clear the air better than anything else ever could." He wasn't just talking about the weather. I looked around at the mismatched chairs, the crooked tables, the messy chalk drawings on the sidewalk, the mismatched faces that made up our little slice of the world. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished, it was home, and it was ours not because we all looked the same, or believed the same, or lived the same way, but because we chose to stay, because we chose each other, because we learned the hard way that the real beauty of a place isn't in how flawless it looks. It's in how deeply it forgives, how fiercely it loves, how bravely it grows. As the night deepened and the stars thickened above, I closed my eyes for a moment and listened. Not for the silence of fear, not for the hum of judgment, but for the simple, precious, almost holy sound of Chestnut Grove finally breathing easy. It sounded a lot like hope. The end.